Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a UK political update where I'm going to give you a little insight to a scandal that has not quite erupted, but it's taken place in the UK concerning a Reform MP, Sarah Pochin. Just to give you a bit of context for those who are not aware, maybe foreign viewers and whatnot, foreign to me that is. Sarah Pochin is an MP for Reform. Reform UK have 5 seats in a 650 member of Parliament House of Commons. It's a very small percentage, but they get an insane amount of television coverage. For example, there's a grooming gangs inquiry, and the BBC were running the Nigel Farage's response to it all in a live press conference, I think, in the last 24 hours. And you're thinking, why have you taken a party that only has 5 MPs out of 650 and are letting us know exactly what they think about everything? They get a press conference for everything that happens, and so you get this spiral effect of Reform doing well in the polls. They get more platform on TV, so it makes them do better in the polls because they become more and more acceptable, more and more popular, more and more coverage, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. And I think this is a bit of a challenge for all the other parties because they just get free coverage all the time from mainstream media. Well, there's been a scandal. So Sarah Pochin was an MP. They went from 5 MPs to 4 MPs, as there's a big argument with Rupert Lowe and a court case, I think, impending or whatever. So it went down to 4, and then Sarah Pochin won a by-election by a whisker, handful of votes, and went back up to 5, then went back down to 4, and then they've got a defection from the Tories, back up to 5. Sarah Pochin, I think, was a former Tory herself. So most, if not all, I think all MPs are former Conservative Party somethings, so mayor, MPs, donors, so on and so forth. And now they are riding high on huge polls, but they can't stop getting into controversies. And here we have another one, Sarah Pochin, who was already in trouble previously for making some comments about burqas and Muslims wearing burqas. And that led to Zia Yusuf, who's one of the main people that's rolled out every time they want some commentary from Reform. But he didn't like that, so he left the party and then was coaxed back, and now he's basically all over the TV more and more. So she's already been controversial enough to have almost lost one of their main spokespeople. Now she is at it again, so let's get into that. Okay, so we have Sarah Pochin here. As someone's saying, Sarah Pochin is an effing racist. This was never just about asylum seekers or immigrants. To them, this is about all people that are not white. They're the BNP. So the idea here is that she has said something pretty egregious. This is it's kind of cut, as in the screen. This is her interview with Talk TV, but whoever did this for TikTokers, they've not cut the audio as much as like just zoomed in on her rather than the whole screen. But let's go through it.
Drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people, full of, you know, people that basically are anything.
What's wrong with that, Sarah? What's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't reflect our society, and I feel that you know, your average white person, average white family is, like, I agree with you, Stuart, not represented anymore in TV.
There are lots of white people on television, Sarah, are there not? There are lots of white people. There are lots of white men. There are lots of white women.
We're talking about adverts, and how many times do you look at a TV advert and you think there's not a single white person on it? And actually it is. It's something that's happened because, I believe, of the woke liberality that goes on inside, you know, this sort of, like, in the arty-farty world. And actually, you know what, people, I'm hearing this more and more, people notice and people will switch off. Drives me.
Okay, so she's not reflective of our, you know, she's speaking as a white person saying, well, it's not reflective of me. It should be all about me and my whiteness and whatever. Okay, well, I mean, this is a tricky subject to talk about, but essentially, There is, what is it, 16% of the UK population now ethnic minorities, and you've got, I don't know, BAME, black and minority ethnic. Stats are quite varied, but it's going to be somewhere around there. And then, of course, you've got mixed race as well, who will arguably be able to identify as multiple different kind of ethnicities and whatnot. So you've got a fairly substantial proportion of the UK society that she's just dismissing, but saying that, when you put on an advert, there are just too many black people and brown people on TV. Now, there will be an element of almost like the kind of Rooney Rule for NFL in the US, where you have people trying to get more representation of minorities on TV for a larger. I mean, if you're looking at a whole societal view of things, what I guess you would want to do as, say, a government is have representation, fair representation, but you want to be giving people a sense of role models, sense of equality of opportunity, that you can strive for this. And the Rooney Rule in the US said, look, if you're going to have, there's an underrepresentation of, say, black people in NFL coaching. So if you're going to shortlist people, one of those people you shortlist has to be black. It doesn't mean that you have to have more black people as coaches. It just means that they need to get a foot in the door. You need to shortlist some of them, and then you're still going to pick on merit. But with regard to selection, it's slightly different, I guess, for adverts. With regard to selection, it's not about merit. It's about picking people that you. I guess the argument here is that you're picking people because you think that you're virtue signaling something, or they're not. They're then being chosen because they're black and ethnic minority, rather than, or a person of color, rather than just picking anyone or having white representation, so on and so forth. And it's I guess recognizing that there are more black and brown skinned people on TV than there used to be 50 years ago. I mean, that is demonstrably true. But for someone like me, I really couldn't give a crap. Honestly, whatever. But if you're watching, I don't know, a Sainsbury's advert or a bloody Argos advert or whatever, and you see a black person that annoys you, then I don't know, might say something about yourself. Now, you can notice this. I notice it. I notice that there are more black people and brown skinned people than there used to be. It's just I don't really care. But if you care, it means you've got an issue with people who aren't white. Now, what has happened? She's actually come out, and Elliot Higgins says, so she's not a racist. She just thinks there are too many non-white people on TV, and she finds it upsetting. So Sarah Pochin has then come out and said, my comments on the Talk TV phone-in earlier today were phrased poorly, and I unreservedly apologize for any offense caused, which was not my intention. The point I was making is that many British TV adverts have gone DEI mad. This term that's been imported from America, DEI mad, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and are now unrepresentative of British society as a whole. This is not an attack on any group, but an observation about balance and fairness in how our country is portrayed on screen. A study commissioned by Channel 4 as part of its Mirror on the Industry project found that black people were featured in more than half of adverts in 2022, up sharply from 37% in 2020 following the Black Lives Matter movement. By contrast, black people make up around 4% of the population in England and Wales, according to the 2021 census. Of course, that's slightly problematic, because featuring on TV, like, there can be like 20 people on an advert, right? If you've got a crowd of people and say, well, that one features a black person, you're like, I would question the maths there to some degree. And anyway, but what I've had this argument with my mates down a pub previously, where I was saying, look, what you have to do is kind of force representation, so until it becomes normalized, where you don't have to force people to be featuring on these adverts and on these TV shows, and eventually you are having these people acting as role models, more people get into acting, more representation, and it'll eventually calm down to like a full-on natural representation, where it's just people don't need to think about these things. It's just is fairly natural, and you just have a natural representation. we get past that. But you've got to go through this. There was underrepresentation, so you push for it, so you get a little bit of overrepresentation, and then it calms down to normal. But really, don't worry too much about it, type thing. Now, this is a tricky conversation, but the problem for Sarah Pochin is that she's coming from a place where I don't think she's interested in good faith dialogue. She's trying to press for a kind of a maintained white privilege or white position in society, where she's thinking about our society there. So the way she phrased that, it's very clear that she's not thinking in a universal way, where she's thinking of our society being a society full of the diversity that actually exists in the UK. I mean, she's just really thinking from one side of the fence there. So then you had Zia Yusuf, who himself is brown skinned, talking to Trevor Phillips, who used to be involved. He used to be in the police, did he not? And was involved in actually diversity in the police force. I think, correct me if I'm wrong there, but he's now a host on IT on Sky News, and a morning show on Sky News. And there's just a really interesting, if not a little bit of uncomfortable conversation here, which I think kind of sums up the problems with Sarah Pochin.
One of the issues for reform, indeed all Nigel Farage led parties, is not necessarily Mr. Farage's behaviour or yours, but of some of the people who join you. Your colleague Sarah Pochin, the Reform MP for Runcorn, said yesterday, and I'm quoting here, "It drives me mad seeing adverts full of black and Asian people." Now, she's apologised, but she clearly thought that. How did you feel when you heard that?
Well, I know Sarah very well. I was instrumental in her selection as a candidate, worked very hard to get her elected, and I'm extremely glad that I did. I consider her a close friend, and she's a great MP for Runcorn. She did say those words, and she has apologised, saying that it was a poorly phrased thing to say. But you've got to put that into context. The caller, a gentleman called Stuart, had called in, and I think he was rightfully upset about the massive underrepresentation of some groups in television advertising and significant overrepresentation of others, Trevor.
But
we have to be able to talk about some
But these were her words.
Because that was those statistics borne out by a Channel 4 study.
She went on to say people are switching off, but there are too many black and Asian people on telly. Is she turning off telly now?
No, if you listen, I encourage...
I love that. Is she turning off TV now? Look at me and you. So you got a black guy interviewing an Asian guy. It's like, well, this is not representative of the UK. Like, surely we should have another 8 white people around us. Like, has she got a problem with this? And that's a really good point. It's like, technically, she should turn on the TV now and say, "Oh, this is not representative of the UK. I'm going to turn this off." When actually this is a Reform MP, Reform UK spokesperson talking on a news channel, and that should be in her best interest to watch, given that this is her party. So there are problems certainly with what she said.
Encourage you to anyone listening to this to
listen
to the whole thing. Of course not. I know Sarah extremely well. She's a lovely person. She's apologised rightly, because it was poorly phrased, as she said. But as I said,
but I think this is a weird distinction. It wasn't poorly phrased. I mean, it's exactly what she meant to say, and you're saying what she said was in effect correct. But it's poor. How is it poorly phrased? What part of it was poorly phrased?
Stuart, who called in about underrepresentation of some people on television,
and he's saying some people, he means white people. He's not. He's too afraid to say that.
And overrepresentation of others, I think, is a very valid point we must be able to talk about.
All right. Zia Yusuf, thank you for your time this morning. And Sarah, if you're watching, stay with us. Right.
Yes. So I think this analysis of what's taken place by Emily Maitlis on the newsagents is absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to play this to you because I think it's well worth discussing.
Sarah Pochin does something very useful for reform, actually. And I didn't think I'd be saying this 2 days ago. But the fact that they sort of keep letting her go out there. She was the one that did the burqa should be banned statement the first time. She's the only female Reform MP, and she sort of gets out there, says something pretty ludicrous, which Reform then carefully distances themselves from. In other words, oh, she might say that, but that's not where the party is. The party is here. The party is, I think Farage is very aware that he doesn't want to be sort of in the burqa chat. He doesn't want to be in the racist chat. He doesn't want to be sort of in the outliers chat. He wants to try and make reform look as if it's mainstream. But it is very helpful for him, for the party, to have somebody that is pushing at the door of racism the whole time, pushing at the door of, multi-ethnicity, pushing at the door of sort of deportation and all that kind of stuff. Because
And this is a really good point, because many of you might not think that what she said was racist, right? You'd say, well, that's a fair thing to say. When it comes to racism, it's about the intention. Like words themselves are just sounds, right? So it's about what your meaning is and your intention in saying it. So I can use certain terms which people would find really offensive and have racist overtones or undertones, and yet people from within those communities can say those words, and it's not the same at all. So it's about who is saying these things and what the intention is behind them. So really, what is the sort of person she is, and what does she want in her politics, as an outcome of what she says? She wants fewer black people and fewer Asian people on television. She wants more white people on television, because she really clearly sees skin color as the defining measure of someone, the defining characteristic of someone, should I say. So on and so forth. So the question is, well, what are her objectives? What kind of person is she? Now, Zia Yusuf, as an Asian person, is really standing up for her, but I guess that's his job. I wonder really whether she is an inclusive sort of person or an exclusive sort of person, right?
this is how they work out where the public mood is. She is their canary. She's
Such a good
sent
point.
out, or she leaps out, and she goes much further than reform would ever do on the day. But maybe she opens the door, and maybe people start catching up, and maybe before you know it, you've got somebody else, jumping on the British adverts bandwagon.
Such a good point. So this is expanding the Overton window. The Overton window is what used to be acceptable to talk about, and maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what Sarah Pochin said would have been like properly unacceptable. Now it's like marginally unacceptable because some people are standing up for them. We'll see that in a second. And so what reform here, or any given person in these kind of situations, is doing is expanding that Overton window of what's acceptable to talk about. So she's normalizing edgy conversation topics and viewpoints to the point where they're normalized, and then someone else can come and say, well, she said that, now actually I'm going to jump in on this bandwagon, as Emily Maitlis says, and I'm going to say that, and then more and more people say it, and then before you know it, you've got people picketing outside Channel 4 or ITV or whatever, like shouting that there are not enough white people on adverts, and you're like, oh my goodness, how have we got to this place? And you can argue that there's this pendulum effect, that you have underrepresentation, overrepresentation, or whatever the thing is that you're talking about. You're like woke, and you go, okay, we need to think about these people, or the way we say these things, or whatever, and the pendulum swings over here to woke, and then you're like, everyone goes mental, and it swings back over here to anti-woke, and then everyone's like, oh, this is horrific, and it swings back again, and it's just like, eventually it should hopefully settle down with something pretty reasonable, but who knows? I think we're moving very much in all sorts of ways towards this much more extreme version of reality at the moment, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think we're seeing it in the United States, and where suddenly it's acceptable to wear balaclavas and nick people off the streets, and blow boats up in the Caribbean without due process, and people are like, not, oh my goodness, what's happened to our norms, moral norms, and they seem to be going out the window, and anything's okay now, and you can just start saying horrific things again on TV. And I'm not saying what she said is horrific, but I do find it problematic, because I'm pretty sure I've got to judge a character of the sort of person she is, Zia Yusuf notwithstanding, and I'm fairly sure that there is not a little bit of racism in Sarah Pochin. So anyway, I'll let Emily Maitlis finish.
She's done the job for him.
Yeah, it's a really interesting argument, and you can work it through and see how that happens. I think fundamentally that given where Farage is in the polls and where Reform are in the polls at kind of 35%, and you are trying to expand on that to get yourself to a place where actually victory in a general election is possible, and you are trying to show that the brand is decontaminated and that it's not just sort of people who are, she drives me mad seeing black and Asian people. I mean, that is not where Reform wants to be. And yeah, Farage can make himself look like a more moderate
The only thing I'd
figure.
say about that is, I think...
How many Reform figures are there?
If you'd asked us 5 years ago whether we would be jumping on the grave of DEI, I mean, any chief executive... Do you remember over the George Floyd stuff, and has everyone got their black box ready, and has everyone, shown how much they care about police brutality, and has everyone sort of done the right thing?
Yeah.
If you'd thought then that in 5 years' time we'd be jumping up and down, with people shouting woke is dead and DI is dead, and thank God we can all say what we like, and isn't it a relief that we don't have to pander to all this, you would not have believed that then. And I think that this stuff is jumped on now, but I think it it insidiously opens a door of acceptability.
100%, and that to me is a key here. It's about this sort of creeping normalization of pretty outrageous rhetoric. Now here we have GB News, which is Reform UK's mouthpiece, saying that this is, essentially this is the evidence of that normalization that Emily Maitlis was talking about.
Stop apologising to these people. Yes, Sarah Pochin made a very good point in a very clumsily way. And stop apologising to the...
So it's like we need to stop apologising for this. She may have said it in a clumsy way, but it's bang on, which I don't quite get. Okay, what is the clumsy thing? What you're trying to say is I need to show some kind of criticism for it, because I can't outright come say it's perfect, because otherwise I'll be getting into as much trouble as Sarah Pochin. So I've got to say it's not I wouldn't have said it quite like that, but essentially what she said is entirely correct. Yeah. So anyway, controversy or Reform courts controversy rather than controversy courts reform. It's interesting what Dawn Butler says. This is more of a procedural thing for the House of Commons, but an interesting interchange between the Deputy Speaker in the House of Commons and Dawn Butler. Dawn Butler's an MP who has previously been thrown out of the House of Commons for refusing, she called someone a liar and then refused to not call them a liar. So it's basically, you can't say certain things in the House of Commons. So this is where, our MPs hang out to debate stuff and vote on things. And there are certain rules. You can't clap in the House of Commons, which is why everyone goes, here, 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 because you're not allowed to clap. You can't say certain things about other politicians. You've got to call them, right honourable friend here from Runcorn or whatever. And she's been thrown out for falling foul of this before. And here she falls foul again, or decides not to fall foul again. But she's asking, well, if this is a racist thing she said, why can't I call her a racist type thing?
Can be black and brown and be British. So I'm completely offended by that comment. It is a racist comment, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can you imagine the constituents of that MP going to see her knowing that she's a racist? Order.
And it's there are so many other interesting. Sorry, I'm interrupting here, but Sarah Pochin, you could say, well, what percentage of the population are Welsh? What percentage of the population of Britain are Northern Irish? What percentage of the population of the country is Scottish? Okay, well, do we have representation on our adverts for them? Why are you not campaigning for them? Why are you only seeing skin color and not any other characteristic? I just kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's taking skin color as the defining thing. It's a real visual thing, and going on that. Well, what about men and women? Have you had an analysis of whether women are overrepresented or underrepresented in adverts? What about men? What about children? What about adolescents? What about Welsh, Northern Irish, Scottish, English, Northern, Southern, so on and so forth? So I think there are some serious problems with Sarah Pochin's position, because she is she is really focusing on the one defining characteristic, which I think does lead one to think that she probably is a little bit racist.
Can the Honourable Lady please reflect on her language and withdraw the remark about another Honourable Member in this place? Madam Deputy Speaker, that comment is absolutely a racist comment. And if we cannot call that comment out in this House, that is in breach of the Nolan principles for MPs. And I want to know, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you can help me in ensuring that... Order. For clarity's sake, it's the calling of a member of this House a racist. Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that, let me just quote again what the member for Runcorn and Helsby said. It drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people and full of Asian people. It doesn't reflect society. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is a racist comment. And it is against the Nolan principles. And how can we ensure that members of Parliament abide by the Nolan principles? It's not the comment that the Honourable Member is referring to. It's the fact that that she called the member a racist. That is the issue. If you can please reflect on your remarks of calling a member of this House a racist and stick to the comment being a racist. It may be that she considers that that is dancing on the pin of her head, but it's important that we all act with respect and set an example.
She's getting a bit flustered.
For the country. Giving me deja vu. I appreciate that in this House that we are not supposed to be disrespectful and call members of Parliament, MPs, what they actually are. Ultimately, the comment is a racist comment. It's quite strange that I'm unable to call out the member for being a racist, having made a racist comment. Order. Please, it's time and time again. Can you please consider withdrawing the comment about a member of this House being a racist? I don't want to be thrown out of Parliament again. So I will withdraw the fact that I am referring to the Member of Parliament as a racist because of her racist comments. Has she informed the member for Runcorn and Helsby that she intended to refer to her in the chamber? I have. The chair is not responsible for comments made by individual members outside this place. If the honourable member considers there has been a breach of the Code of Conduct, the proper procedure is to complain to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards.
It's just, I find that a fascinating exchange there. And then just to add this one in, we've got Chris Philp here, who's a Conservative Party sort of bigwig at the moment, refusing to call out Sarah Pochin. But again, it's the way she said it was clumsy, and then anyway, this is Laura Kunsberg with Chris Philp.
Let's just start with what Wes Streeting was saying about the Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin's comments. Do you think she was being racist?
Well, it's certainly not language that I would use, and I don't think politicians should speak in those terms. Look, I'm not going to start throwing names around, but it's not language that I would have used. Look, I think the public Sorry, Wes Streeting just said very clearly in his view that was racist. Yeah, so you say it was racist or not? I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to call her that word. It's not language. It's not language I would have used. But we should have.
I'm not going to call her that word. I mean, they're so scared, particularly the Conservatives are very scared about calling Reform out on anything particularly, because they're trying to court the Reform voters and bring them back to the fold. But in many cases, although Reform have taken voters from everywhere, really.
Acknowledge the public do have concerns, legitimate concerns, about large-scale immigration that needs to be controlled and
And of course, this isn't a conversation about immigration. It's nothing to do with immigration, in the short term at least. I mean, you know, the fact that there are however many percentage of people in the UK who are of black and ethnic minority ethnic background is almost certainly to do with long-term immigration, but that's not what is being debated here. It's just merely representation of skin color. That's what Sarah Pochin is talking about. So he's doing a bit of bait and switch here, or trying to yeah, he is, I think, being somewhat fallacious, should we say.
Concerns about large-scale immigration that needs to be controlled, and discussing that certainly is not racist.
But do you agree with her that seeing adverts full of black people, full of Asian people on TV is something that ought not to be seen? That's
no, I don't agree with her. But I do think, and I wouldn't use that language.
But is it racist language? Or
What language? I mean, what other language can you use? I wouldn't use that language. Is he just saying is it the idea that she doesn't want to see? Maybe that's the language he's referring to.
Straightforward question.
I'm not calling her racist. No, but I do think there are legitimate concerns the public have about mass migration that need to be addressed.
And that's a separate point, but forgive me, I'm asking you a straightforward question. Is it racist?
I've answered it 3 times already. Well, no, it's not. I have not called her racist.
I'm not asking you to call an individual fellow MP racist. I'm asking you if, in your view, it is a racist sentiment to say, I don't like seeing black or Asian people on TV.
I don't think that's language that politicians should use.
Okay, you've made it clear you're not going to say whether or not you believe that's a racist sentiment, and that's you're right in that way to answer that question.
There you go. So then we get onto questions about, well, what are Reform really? What are they trying to be as a party? And it appears that they are trying to just be UKIP. Like I've said to you before, it's UKIP, goes on to the Brexit party that then became Reform UK, but they're the same party. And then there's this idea, and I've talked about this before, that it's all about pushing the envelope, like Emily Maitlis was saying, but in terms of larger political movements, what is acceptable to say that allows you to be part of the mainstream conversation. So it went from the National Front decades and decades ago, we're like, oh no, they're not acceptable, you know, only appeal to a very few very small proportion of society who would openly be okay with saying I'm a member of the National Front. And this is what happened with Front National, like the French version, in France under Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, wasn't it, who started the Front National and was an overt racist, like proper like Nazi sympathizer basically. And his daughter took over the party and tried to take it to a point where it became acceptable. So, okay, if we just slightly slice off some of that rhetoric and we change a little bit of these policies, and where can we get to a point where people are like, okay, now you're acceptable. Okay, now I'm okay with admitting that I agree with you in public. And it's the same. So the National Front in the UK became the BNP, and the BNP was much more popular than National Front by proportion. And you had the English Defence League, and you had all these movements, Britain First and all this. And then you kind of had UKIP broadly coming out that getting hold of Eurosceptic sentiment, and that became, I mean, a lot of people will contest this. There'll be a lot of UKIP voters say, hang on, I had nothing to do with the EDI, I had nothing to do with the BNP, etc., etc. And that's absolutely right. But I'm talking about in terms of just this idea of taking some of these sentiments where, because, you know, it's not all UKIP are racist, but all racist voters who are going to vote for a main party are going to vote broadly UKIP, as it was. So, you know, in the election, you know, if you've got a choice of all these parties, the racist people will vote UKIP because they are the most isolationist, most, you know, anti-EU, most anti-migration kind of party. And so that's what I mean by this. So I'm probably not referring to the majority of UKIP voters even, but this is how I see the evolution. And it's about, you know, what's acceptable. Okay, now we've hit this spot where Reform and this evolution of those ideas has taken a core element of anti-migration, anti-immigrant sentiment, and then built all these other things around it. And it's now got to a point where Reform is hugely appealing. Like 35% of the electorate is up for that, but essentially they are just a repackaged version of UKIP, which you can argue will have elements of whatever came before. So here we've got two the same pictures almost, but two different eras, with UKIP member in election broadcast suspended over racist tweets, and then here Reform UK activist filmed making racist comments about Rishi Sunak. So yeah, same sorts of articles being written about two supposedly different parties, but they seem to be the same party again. And now we're starting to see, you know, quite a considerable number of councillors who were voted in the May English council elections, where they took place in a number of different districts around England. We are seeing a lot of these, you know, being either going truant, being sacked, being suspended, resigning, all sorts of different issues, because they have attracted reform, have attracted through that kind of language. Like I was saying before, UKIP would have attracted all the people who are racist, as well as all the people who are concerned about, you know, sovereignty in the EU and migration, you know, in a genuine fashion, but also all these other people. Now, if you're taking all of these people with you and you're adding, it means that when you suddenly need to find a load of councillors to run for your party in the council elections, you don't have enough. You're not an embedded enough party. You're quite nascent, and you do have proportionally a lot of these fringe people that aren't really that fringe anymore because they're embedded within the party. So when you're calling for thousands of councillors to run in local elections, you are going to get a lot of these people. And what I'm saying is not controversial, because it's being borne out by the fact that loads of them were elected as councillors, and then lots of them are now being sacked or, you know, resigning because they have said in their past or are continuing to say really quite egregious things. So Reform UK expels 2 of its Kent councillors accused of undermining its interests here. And now this isn't necessarily to do with racism, but I can give you a list of councillors and Reform UK members who have got themselves into a lot of hot water because of things they have said. Go and look at the Bylines Times article on pretty much exactly this. Yeah, so I think Reform are in an interesting position whereby Nigel Farage knows that he needs to get Reform to this optimal position of being mainstream to the point where they get a majority of votes. Like, he wants them to get over 50% of the votes. They're at, say, 35% of the votes. Will they find a hard ceiling if they are having rhetoric like Sarah Pochin? I think this is a really interesting question. Like, if she's going to continue to come out and say stuff like this, and other Reform councillors and whatnot are going to get in trouble for saying stuff like this, are they giving themselves a hard ceiling? Nigel Farage has to make Reform acceptable enough that people, including people from ethnic backgrounds, he's going to need those votes, are going to want to vote for them. And if they keep saying stuff like this, then they are going to struggle to get over 50%. They might get 35%, but past that, they're shooting themselves in the foot if they continue saying controversial things like this. And Nigel Farage will know that, and he's going to be deeply frustrated because he needs Sarah Pochin, you know, to be really on side here. But he also needs her to rein it in a little bit. But having said that, he's been talking about ICE, how he wants to import ICE from the US. He had a recent interview with Michelle Hussein where she was trying to pressure him on, what do you want ICE armed balaclava led people, you know, pulling people off the streets? And he was kind of skirting around the issue there. So, you know, there is this idea of pushing the envelope and seeing what they can get away with and seeing what's acceptable. So the Emily Maitlis idea of like pushing the envelope and pushing the discourse to a point where it's testing out the public to see what they find acceptable. I think there's a lot in there. Now, talking about the interview with Michelle Hussein, who's a you know, a really well-respected journalist that's been around for some time. She's now working for Bloomberg TV. This is what Nigel Farage said in an interview with her.
So if you were Prime Minister and NATO jets Russian jets entered NATO airspace, where do you stand on that? Do you think they should be...
Got to shoot them down.
No questions. Whatever that does, however much that inflames tensions.
Listen, love, you're trying
Russia needs to be taught a lesson.
Listen, love, you're trying ever so hard.
Like the patronising tone here and calling her love. Listen, love. Listen, love. It's like it's 1960s England again. Listen, love. You know, I remember a time when there weren't women like you asking questions, person of color, asking, you know, these black and Asian people on TV, too many of them. You're one of them. Look, listen, love. Yeah, I'm obviously over exaggerating here, but the idea that he's this condescending, there will be people that like that. But, you know, society does move on, and more people than not will find that pretty offensive. But this seems to be where reform is at the moment. They're struggling for the mass appeal, I think, because they keep resorting to this kind of old school approach to society. And yeah, and Nigel Farage, although he's the one that should be realizing that he needs this mainstream appeal, is falling foul himself.
Shoot them down.
No questions. Whatever that does, however much that inflames tensions.
Listen, love, you're trying ever
Russia
so hard.
needs to be taught a lesson.
Listen, love, you're trying ever so hard. I'm the only person in the world, I think, that stood up in the European Parliament in 2014. And do you know what I said? There will be a war in Ukraine. It's coming. I'm the only person that got it right.
So if you were...
So that was seen as pretty controversial. And I think rightly so. Here is LBC radio host reacting to that.
I came across a clip of Nigel Farage being interviewed by Michelle Hussein, who works for Bloomberg. And I couldn't quite believe my ears.
Russian jets entered NATO airspace. Where do you stand on that? Do you think they should be...
Got to shoot them down.
No questions. Whatever that does, however much that inflames tensions.
Listen, love, you're trying ever
Russia
so hard.
needs to be taught a lesson.
Listen, love, you're trying ever so hard.
Listen, love, you're trying ever so hard. Now, the thing is, I've interviewed a few politicians in my time, and when they feel a bit uncomfortable, they will say things like that. But I've never, in my 25, 30 years of doing this, heard that. And I don't think it's a path we want to go down. You can agree or disagree with Nigel Farage and his policies. That is not how a Prime Minister behaves. I came across...
Yeah. I mean, there are hallmarks of David Cameron that said something fairly similar in the House of Commons some years back. He said, "Yes, dear," or to another politician in the House of Commons, if I remember correctly, something like that. So this isn't how prime ministers should act. But actually, David Cameron almost was as bad. But yeah, it's just pretty. I think pretty typical. And I think Reform have a problem if they are going to keep courting these controversial viewpoints and this kind of controversial rhetoric in all different domains. And Nigel Farage needs to be careful himself. But then there will be a lot of people that kind of love that. They're like, yeah, he says it like it is, that kind of thing. And I don't know if they're going to want to get over 50% of the vote, then I think they've got to be careful how they broach these subjects and talk about these things and just interact in general. And I think really it's going to be a relitigation of Brexit as well as, you know, immigration going through to the next election. I've talked about that previously. There's an interesting observation here from Liz Webster, who is very interested in farming and was very much a Remainer and was pretty upset with Brexit because it kind of was not good for the farming industry. But she's referring to an article in a Spanish newspaper that said, Spanish press get to the heart of the matter about Brexit Britain, the Gordian knot of the far right. When everything fails, Brexit, a desperate Starmer plays the pro-European card to attack Farage. Facing collapsing approval ratings and a surging far right, Keir Starmer has turned to the one issue he once swore to avoid, the economic wreckage of Brexit, in a desperate bid to undercut Nigel Farage and Reform UK, now leading national polls. With Britain mired in inflation, budget deficits and political fatigue, Labour figures like Rachel Reeves are suddenly admitting that Brexit damaged the economy. But analysts say the tactic comes too late. Voters see the crisis as homegrown, not Brussels-made. And Farage's populist message that elites never listen is resonating far more deeply than Starmer's technocratic appeals. In today's Britain, regret over Brexit runs high, but disillusionment runs deeper. So people might regret Brexit, but actually they're just peed off with, you know, the elites and disillusioned with the political class, and they see as Nigel Farage as being the answer to that, even though Nigel Farage he sells reform as the everyman's party, and there is a lot of working class support for reform, but he is a super rich public school educated former, what was he, commodities trader. He's an absolute elite, as are all the people that are funding reform. I mean, it is a Conservative Party 2.0. It's just disillusioned, low tax corporate cronies wanting to line their own pockets, getting behind Farage's reform. So it's not the everyman party that I think they're selling it as being. So I think it will be a re-litigation of Brexit again, weirdly, and it could be that Labour try and embrace Remain, or embrace even rejoin. And in fact, Liz Webster has a fascinating, I'm not going to go through it now, but a fascinating thread here talking about Brexit realities worse than Project Fear predictions. Dire 2016 Brexit warnings have proven exactly right, but in fact reality has been even worse than Cameron and the retail chiefs predicted. Let's break it down point by point. Sterling fall predicted 12%, actual over 15%, and lasting damage. In the days after the 2016 vote, the pound fell 13% against the dollar, its sharpest drop in modern history. Unlike past shocks, sterling never recovered. It has remained around 10 to 15% weaker than pre-Brexit levels. That permanent devaluation raised the cost of almost everything Britain imports, especially food, fuel and fertilizer. And she goes on to say food prices predicted £220 per family per year, actual £1,200 per family since Brexit. And she goes on, so takes all these things and like these are what the supposedly fear-mongering Remainers were saying to scare people into voting to remain in the EU, but it didn't work, and people claim that they were just lying and fear-mongering, but the reality is actually worse than they were predicting. It just took a bit longer to come about. And I think there's a really interesting thread there, and I think totally salient points. So this is the kind of political landscape at the moment in the UK, where you have populist right-wing party that's kind of still stirring the pot of those Brexit emotions in 2016, anti-immigration sentiments, and they're realizing that if they are just merely like UKIP repackaged, and if they are going to get into power, then what was it that got UKIP the success they did in 2016? It was stirring that anti-immigration sentiment, because the sovereignty arguments have all been and gone, right? We're out of the EU, so you can't complain about sovereignty now. We haven't got the trade deals. Brexit has failed us, but let's just put that in a drawer and forget about it. We need to go back to the halcyon days of 2016 campaigning and go on anti-immigration. And then, Sarah Pochin will add to that, too many black and brown people on TV. And that's the kind of political landscape we got at the moment, where, the Green Party are looking to be the antithesis of that. They are embracing immigration and saying it's a positive thing to look at kind of a left-wing populism against this right-wing populism. And then you got the Conservatives and Labour and Lib Dem somewhere in the middle, and it could be that Labour have to differentiate themselves from other parties by maybe embracing a rejoin or something in terms of Brexit going forward. I don't know. 3 years is going to be a long time. But anyway, those are my thoughts, my rambling thoughts on what's taken place in this news scandal involving Reform UK and Sarah Pochin. Not a fan of Sarah Pochin, but you would imagine that would be my sentiment, because I'm not a fan of Nigel Farage, and you know that. Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.